Annabelle sits silently beside her sister Emily's hospital bed while her parents whisper about her failed career to other family members. They've spent years telling everyone she dropped out of medical school too weak to handle the pressure. What they don't know is that Annabelle has been quietly working 80-hour weeks at a different hospital across town, climbing the ranks while maintaining complete secrecy about her achievements. Today, their worlds are about to collide as Annabelle's professional and personal lives unexpectedly intersect during this routine family hospital visit. Some people are born knowing exactly what they want to do with their lives. I was one of those people. I was 7 years old when our golden retriever Max choked on a small rubber ball. Everyone panicked, but something in me went utterly calm. I remember moving forward, reaching into his mouth and carefully dislodging the ball while my parents stood frozen in fear. The relief in Max's eyes when he could breathe again changed me forever. That night, I announced to my family that I was going to be a surgeon. My father laughed and patted my head. "Sure, sweetheart, and tomorrow you'll want to be an astronaut." That dismissal became the foundation of my relationship with my parents. My father, Thomas Walker, built his construction company from nothing into one of the largest in the state. He measured everything in life by success, status, and appearance. My mother, Diana, came from old money but had embraced her role as the perfect corporate wife with frightening dedication. Together, they created a household where achievement wasn't celebrated, it was expected. And then there was my sister Emily. 3 years older, eternally perfect Emily. She followed the path my parents laid out with precision, prestigious business degree engagement to the son of my father's business partner, and a carefully curated social media presence that made our family look like something from a magazine cover. Emily wasn't cruel about her status as the golden child. She simply accepted it as her due, occasionally throwing me sympathetic glances when our parents would compare us. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. Our family dinners were performance reviews. Annabelle, a B+ in chemistry, Emily never got anything less than an A-. Or your piano recital was adequate, but remember when Emily won the state competition, each comparison was delivered with the practiced disappointment of parents who had mastered the art of making their children feel perpetually inadequate. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, I clung to my dream of becoming a doctor with stubborn determination. I studied while other kids played. I volunteered at the local hospital every summer from age 14. I shadowed every physician who would let me absorbing everything like a sponge, desperate for water. My father's favorite phrase was, "Either be the best or don't bother trying." He applied this standard unevenly between his daughters. For Emily, being the best meant following his precise instructions. For me, he seemed to constantly move the target, ensuring I could never quite reach it. When I was accepted to pre-med at Northwestern, my mother's response was, "Well, that's surprising. Let's hope you can keep up." My father merely nodded and said, "Getting in is the easy part," yet somehow their doubt fueled me. I graduated summa cum laude, scoring in the 99th percentile on my MCATs, and was accepted to Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, one of the most competitive programs in the country. Even then, at the dinner celebrating my acceptance, my father raised his glass and said, "Let's hope you have what it takes to finish." I believed his words came from a place of tough love pushing me toward excellence. That illusion shattered during my second year of medical school when I came home for Thanksgiving. I arrived early unannounced, hoping to help my mother with dinner preparations. Instead, I overheard my father in his study speaking to my uncle. "No, I don't think Annabelle will make it through. Medical school has a way of weeding out the ones who don't have what it takes. Between us, I give her another year before she realizes she's in over her head." I stood frozen outside that door, my world tilting on its axis. This wasn't tough love. This was active sabotage, betting against my success to maintain his control over the narrative of our family. That moment changed everything. I realized my father didn't want me to succeed on my own terms. He wanted me to fail so I would return to the path he had chosen. I didn't confront him. Instead, I walked back outside, composed myself, and rang the doorbell properly. Throughout dinner, I smiled and answered questions about school while a plan formed in my mind. If my family was determined to see me fail, perhaps I should give them exactly what they expected while secretly becoming exactly who I was meant to be. Medical school is designed to break you. The endless hours, the competitive classmates, the constant fear that one mistake could cost a life, it's a crucible meant to forge either steel or dust. By my third year at Johns Hopkins, I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep caffeine in quantities that should have been lethal and the increasingly frayed thread of my determination. My fiancé Jake had been my rock through it all. We'd met during undergraduate studies, and he'd supported my medical school dreams even when my family expressed doubts. He understood the missed dates, the canceled plans, the times I fell asleep mid-conversation. At least I thought he understood. The Friday before my critical neurology and cardiology exams, I decided to surprise Jake by coming home early. I'd been studying at the library for 36 hours straight and desperately needed to see his face to remember why I was putting myself through this hell. I picked up his favorite takeout and drove to his apartment, imagining his smile when he saw me. I had a key, but I knocked first out of habit. When no one answered, I let myself in. The television was on, but the living room was empty. I called his name as I set the food down on the kitchen counter. That's when I heard laughter from the bedroom. A woman's laughter. A familiar woman's laughter. I should have left. Instead, I moved toward the bedroom like a sleepwalker, my body functioning on autopilot while my mind screamed at me to turn around. The door wasn't fully closed. Through the crack, I saw them, Jake and my cousin Sarah, tangled in his sheets, completely lost in each other. Sarah, who had been my bridesmaid at the engagement party, my parents insisted on throwing. Sarah, who had helped me pick out wedding invitations just 3 weeks earlier. Sarah, who apparently had been sleeping with my fiancé for months, according to the conversation I forced myself to listen to before finally making my presence known. The confrontation that followed was ugly. Jake claimed the pressure of being with someone so driven was emasculating. Sarah said she never meant for it to happen, but they'd connected on a deeper level. Neither seemed particularly sorry, just sorry they'd been caught. I walked out, drove back to my apartment, and collapsed. The betrayal crushed me with a physical weight that made breathing difficult. For 24 hours, I didn't move from my bed. I didn't eat. I didn't study. I missed both exams. When I finally checked my phone, I had 17 missed calls from my parents. News traveled fast in our social circle. I called them back expecting sympathy, perhaps even the rare comfort of parental support. "This is exactly what happens when you overextend yourself," my mother said instead. "You wouldn't have time for a proper relationship because you're so obsessed with this doctor fantasy." My father was more direct. "This is a blessing in disguise, Annabelle. Medical school was always a reach for you. Now you can come home, take some time, and we'll find you a more suitable career path." 3 days later, they arrived at my apartment unannounced. My mother immediately began cleaning, as though my living space reflected my mental state. My father sat at my kitchen table, opening his laptop. "I've taken the liberty of drafting a withdrawal letter for you," he said, turning the screen toward me. "The dean is a golf buddy of mine. He understands these things happen. There won't be any academic penalty if you withdraw now. I missed 2 exams," I said, my voice hollow from days of crying. "I can make them up." My mother paused her aggressive reorganization of my refrigerator. "Darling, be realistic. You're already struggling. This situation with Jake is unfortunate, but perhaps it's the wake-up call you needed." "I'm not struggling academically," I insisted. "I'm in the top 10% of my class." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Even if that's true, you've clearly reached your breaking point. There's no shame in admitting you aimed too high." That evening they orchestrated what they called a family meeting, but what felt more like an intervention. Emily was there looking uncomfortable but not disagreeing as my parents outlined why quitting was the sensible option. Uncle Robert and Aunt Julia joined, offering platitudes about finding your true calling. Even my grandmother participated via speakerphone, suggesting that some women aren't meant for such demanding careers. The subtext was clear: we need to contain this failure before it damages the family reputation. I sat silently as they discussed my future, as though I weren't present. Something broke in me that night, but not in the way they expected. What broke was the last thread tethering me to their approval. In that moment of clarity, I saw the path forward. "You're right," I said, finally interrupting my father's monologue about a position he could arrange for me at his friend's public relations firm. "I'll withdraw from Johns Hopkins." The relief on their faces was both obvious and infuriating. "I'll contact the dean tomorrow," I added. What I didn't tell them was that I had already spoken to the dean, not about withdrawing, but about transferring. "Doctor," Margaret Chen, Dean of Medical Education, had been surprisingly understanding when I explained my situation. My academic record was excellent, and the circumstances of my missed exams were genuinely extenuating. She helped me arrange a transfer to University of Maryland School of Medicine, equally prestigious, but with the benefit of being completely separate from my father's social network. The next day, I officially withdrew from Johns Hopkins and immediately enrolled at Maryland. I swore the administration to privacy about my enrollment, citing family complications. I found a small apartment in Baltimore, took on extra tutoring jobs to support myself without touching my trust fund, and effectively disappeared from my family's radar except for obligatory holiday visits. As far as they knew, I had failed. As far as I was concerned, I was finally free to succeed on my own terms. Living a double life requires meticulous attention to detail. I created 2 separate identities, Annabelle, the disappointment for family functions, and Dr. Annabelle Walker, medical student, for the rest of my existence. Annabelle, the disappointment, worked part-time at a fictional advertising agency. She wore subdued clothing, minimal makeup, and projected an air of chastened ambition. She attended family events, rarely always with a ready excuse about work deadlines. She nodded politely when relatives asked how she was holding up after everything that happened. She accepted the pitying glances and whispered comments with a practiced smile. Dr. Annabelle Walker, meanwhile, thrived. Free from the suffocating weight of family expectations, I discovered what I could achieve when failure wasn't constantly anticipated. I completed my medical degree with highest honors, graduating second in my class. During my graduation ceremony, I sat alone, watching other students celebrate with their families. The pang of loneliness was real, but so was the fierce pride in knowing I had done this entirely on my own. I matched into the surgical residency program at Memorial Hospital, one of the top programs in the region. Memorial was perfect, prestigious enough to challenge me, but far enough from my family's social circle to maintain my cover. I threw myself into residency with the single-minded focus of someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The grueling schedule of a surgical resident actually made maintaining my double life easier. When family asked why I couldn't attend Emily's baby shower or my cousin's wedding, I could truthfully say I was working. I just let them believe it was at the fictional advertising agency rather than in 36-hour surgical shifts. Still at that little marketing job, my mother would ask during our monthly phone calls, her voice dripping with disappointment. "You know, your father could find you something more substantial." "I'm doing fine, Mom," I would reply. "The work is interesting." What I couldn't tell her was that interesting meant assisting on a groundbreaking cardiac procedure the previous week, or that I had just been praised by the chief resident for my suturing technique, or that I had successfully diagnosed a rare condition that had stumped 2 attending physicians. My father was more direct in his condescension. "When you're ready to rejoin the real world and build a proper career, let me know," he said at Thanksgiving dinner my second year of residency. "There's always a place for you at the company." I smiled and passed the mashed potatoes. My sister Emily, to her credit, seemed to sense there was more to my story. "You seem different," she remarked once while we were alone in the kitchen, more confident. "Are you really happy with this life you've chosen?" For a moment I considered telling her everything. But years of conditioning had taught me that in my family, secrets shared became ammunition. "I'm finding my way," I said instead. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. By allowing my family to believe I had failed, I had freed myself from the pressure that might have actually caused me to fail. Their lowered expectations became my greatest advantage. My 3rd year of residency marked a turning point. A prominent state senator was rushed into emergency surgery after a car accident left him with a ruptured spleen and severe internal bleeding. I was assisting the attending surgeon when complications arose. His blood pressure plummeted and we discovered damage to his hepatic artery that hadn't appeared on the initial scans. The attending froze momentarily, clearly calculating risks and trying to determine the best approach. In that split second, I saw exactly what needed to be done. "Sir," I said quietly, "if we clamp here and place a temporary shunt, we can repair the arterial damage before addressing the splenic rupture." He looked at me surprised both by my suggestion and its obvious merit. "Do it, Walker." My hands didn't shake. My mind remained clear. I performed the procedure with a precision that came from countless hours of practice and study. When we finished 5 hours later, the senator was stable. The attending pulled me aside afterward. "That was quick thinking, Walker. Where did you learn that technique?" I developed it during a research rotation, I admitted. I've been working on modifications to the traditional approach for vascular trauma. What followed was unexpected. Rather than taking credit for the successful surgery, the attending surgeon made sure the chief of surgery knew exactly who had saved the senator's life. Within weeks, I was offered a position as a trauma fellow a year earlier than the standard track. By my 5th year at Memorial, I had published 12 research papers, pioneered 2 surgical techniques, and developed a reputation as one of the most promising young surgeons in the department. My trajectory was noticed. When the position of Deputy Chief of Surgery opened, my name was among those considered despite being younger and less experienced than the other candidates. The morning of the final decision, the Chief of Surgery, Dr. James Harrison, called me into his office. "Walker, you've accomplished more in 5 years than most surgeons do in 10, he said, studying me over his reading glasses. "But there's something about you that puzzles me." My heart rate increased. Had he discovered my family situation? Was my careful separation of worlds about to collapse? "You never seem to celebrate your victories," he continued. "Most surgeons with your record would be shouting their achievements from the rooftops. You act like you're constantly flying under the radar." I considered my response carefully. "I believe the work speaks for itself, sir." He nodded slowly. "That it does. Which is why, effective next month, you'll be the new Deputy Chief of Surgery." I blinked, processing his words. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't." He leaned back in his chair. "But Walker's success deserves acknowledgement. Whatever you're running from, or hiding from, and don't bother denying it, I've been around too long not to recognize the signs it might be time to face it." I smiled politely and changed the subject. That night alone in my apartment, I allowed myself to truly celebrate for the first time. Deputy Chief of Surgery at 32 years old, an achievement almost unheard of. I opened a bottle of champagne I'd been saving and toasted my reflection in the window. "To proving them wrong," I whispered. What I didn't know was that fate was already setting the stage for exactly that confrontation. 6 months into my role as Deputy Chief of Surgery, Dr. Harrison announced his retirement. The board's decision was unanimous. Dr. Annabelle Walker would become the youngest Chief of Surgery in Memorial Hospital's history. The promotion came with increased responsibilities, media attention, and a profile in the city's medical journal. I carefully managed these exposures, declining photographs whenever possible, using my middle name professionally, and maintaining the separation between my worlds. But as any surgeon knows, no matter how careful your technique, eventually all separations fail. It was only a matter of time before my 2 lives collided. The call came on a Tuesday morning. I was reviewing surgical schedules in my office when my personal phone rang. My mother's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. Our monthly call wasn't due for another week, and unscheduled communications were rarely positive. "Hello? Annabelle." My mother's voice was tense, controlled in that specific way that signaled actual panic beneath. "It's Emily. She's collapsed. We're on our way to the hospital now." My blood went cold. "What happened? Which hospital?" "She was at lunch with me, and suddenly couldn't breathe. Then she passed out. The ambulance is taking her to Mercy General." Mercy General. My hospital. My pulse thundered in my ears. "I'll meet you there," I said automatically. "No need to leave work," my mother replied. "Your father and I will handle everything. I'm just calling to inform you." The dismissal was so typical, I almost laughed. "I'm coming, Mom. She's my sister." I hung up before she could respond and immediately called my administrative assistant. "Janet, I need to clear my schedule for the day. Family emergency." "Of course, Dr. Walker. I'll reschedule your 4 o'clock with neurology and have Dr. Patel cover your rounds." "Thank you. Also, there's a patient coming into the ER. Emily Walker, 35, my sister. I need to be notified of everything but." I paused, the weight of my double life suddenly crushing. No one can know she's my sister. Not yet. Janet, bless her, didn't ask questions. "Understood, doctor." I changed from my white coat into civilian clothes kept in my office for emergencies, and made my way to the ER through back hallways, avoiding staff who might recognize me. By the time I arrived, Emily had already been admitted and transferred to the cardiac unit for tests. I found my parents in the waiting area. My father was pacing phone pressed to his ear, barking instructions to someone at his office. My mother sat rigidly in a chair, her perfect posture and immaculate appearance betraying no hint of the crisis except for the whiteness of her knuckles as she clutched her purse. Any news? I asked, approaching them. My father glanced up, nodded vaguely in acknowledgement, and continued his call. My mother's lips tightened. They think it might be her heart. We're waiting for test results. She looked me up and down. You didn't need to rush over. Don't you have work? I took the afternoon off, I said simply. Well, at least sit down. Your hovering is making me nervous. I sat beside her, maintaining the fiction that I was just another worried family member, rather than the chief of surgery who would likely be overseeing my sister's care once the attending physician realized the seriousness of her condition. We waited in uncomfortable silence for 45 minutes. My father finished his call and immediately started another. My mother alternated between checking her watch and sighing dramatically. Neither addressed me directly. From snippets of my father's conversation, I gathered he was rearranging a business dinner, assuring his associate that this minor family situation wouldn't affect their deal. More relatives began arriving: Uncle Robert and Aunt Julia, my cousin Sarah, now married to someone who wasn't Jake, and my maternal grandmother, who immediately began interrogating the nursing staff about Emily's condition as though her social standing entitled her to information. The Walker family has been coming to this hospital for 3 generations, she informed a harried-looking nurse. My granddaughter is not just any patient. I bit my tongue to keep from intervening. If she only knew that her other granddaughter effectively ran this hospital, the irony would be delicious. Uncle Robert spotted me and came over. Annabelle, good to see you. Sorry it's under these circumstances. He lowered his voice. Brave of you to come to a hospital after everything. Must bring back difficult memories. I stared at him momentarily, confused before realizing he was referring to my supposed medical school failure. I'm here for Emily, I said simply. My cousin Sarah approached next, her expression a studied mixture of concern and superiority. Annie, how are you holding up? This must be so hard for you. Before I could respond, my father returned to our group. The chief administrator assures me Emily will receive the hospital's full attention, he announced. Apparently, the chief of surgery is in the building today. Good, my mother replied. We need the best for Emily. I suppressed a smile. If only they knew. A young doctor approached our group. Walker family, I'm Dr. Reyes, cardiology fellow. We've completed Emily's initial workup. My father stepped forward, effectively blocking me from the conversation. What's happening with my daughter? Emily appears to be experiencing acute aortic regurgitation, a leaking heart valve. We've detected a mass on the valve that's preventing it from closing properly. My mind immediately ran through the diagnostic criteria and treatment protocols. This wasn't a simple case. What caused this? My mother demanded. We're still determining that, Dr. Reyes said. It could be endocarditis, an infection of the heart valve. We've started antibiotics, but... He hesitated. But what? My father pressed. The mass is large enough that surgical intervention may be necessary. We're consulting with cardiac surgery now. I knew what this meant. Endocarditis with a vegetation large enough to cause acute regurgitation was potentially life-threatening. Emily would need surgery, and soon. We want the best surgeon, my mother declared. The absolute best. Dr. Reyes nodded. Of course. If surgery is indicated, Dr. Walker would likely perform the procedure. My heart stopped. Dr. Walker. Me. Walker, my father frowned. Any relation to us? No, sir, Dr. Reyes replied, glancing briefly in my direction without recognition. Dr. Walker is our chief of surgery, and one of the top cardiac surgeons in the state. Good, my father said definitively. When can we meet this Dr. Walker to discuss options? The surgical team will come speak with you once they've reviewed the case, Dr. Reyes assured him before departing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Janet. Dr. Patel reviewing your sister's case now. Vegetation on mitral valve 1.5 centimeters. Likely surgical candidate. Preparing OR3. I excused myself, claiming I needed coffee, and slipped away to a quiet corridor. I called Janet immediately. I need to see those scans, I said without preamble. They're in the system. I've marked them as high priority for your review. Who's the attending on call? Dr. Patel, but he's suggesting you take the case. It requires your specialized technique for valve repair. The technique I'd pioneered 3 years ago, of course. Tell him I'll review the case but need to remain anonymous to the family for now. Personal reasons. Dr. Walker, forgive me for asking, but how exactly do you plan to operate on your sister without your family knowing it's you? It was a fair question. One I had no good answer for. I'm figuring that out, I replied. When I returned to the waiting room, a new drama was unfolding. My family had been moved to a private consultation room, and Dr. Patel was explaining Emily's condition in more detail. The vegetation on the valve is large and mobile, creating a significant risk of embolism pieces breaking off and traveling to the brain, or other organs, he was saying as I slipped into the back of the room. So what are our options? My father demanded. Emily needs surgery today, Dr. Patel said firmly. We've scheduled her for this evening. And this Dr. Walker will be performing the surgery, my mother asked. Dr. Patel glanced around the room, his eyes pausing momentarily on me before moving on without recognition. That's our recommendation, Dr. Walker developed a specialized technique for mitral valve repair that would be ideal for Emily's case. We want to meet this surgeon before any decisions are made, my father insisted. Dr. Patel nodded. Of course, I'll arrange that. As he left, my father turned to the family. I'm going to make some calls, see if there's a better hospital we could transfer her to. I couldn't remain silent any longer. Dad transferring her would be dangerous. If that vegetation breaks loose during transport, he looked at me as though surprised I had spoken. Annabelle, I appreciate your concern, but this is a medical decision. Yes, it is. I agreed, careful to maintain my cover. And medically transferring a patient with a large vegetation is extremely risky. My mother frowned. And how would you know that? I scrambled for an explanation. I read a lot of medical articles after everything that happened, trying to understand what went wrong for me. My father's expression softened slightly, the first time I'd seen genuine sympathy from him in years. Well, that's commendable, but we need to consult with actual medical professionals here. The irony was almost painful. Uncle Robert joined the conversation. Thomas, I played golf with the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at University Hospital last month. I could call him. Excellent, my father agreed. See if he can take Emily's case. I stepped out again this time, heading straight for an unused office where I could access Emily's records securely. The scans confirmed my fears. The vegetation was precariously attached, the regurgitation severe. She needed surgery immediately, not after a dangerous transfer, and certainly not after days of my family shopping for surgeons they deemed worthy. I made my decision. Picking up the phone, I called Janet. Schedule the surgery for 6 this evening. I'll be performing it. And the family situation. I took a deep breath. I'll handle it. I returned to the consultation room where my family was still debating hospital options. A nurse had just entered with update forms for my parents to sign. We're still considering our options, my father told her. We may transfer our daughter elsewhere. The nurse looked concerned. Sir Dr. Walker has already scheduled the surgery for this evening. The team is prepping now. We haven't agreed to that, my mother protested. We haven't even met this Dr. Walker. I believe Dr. Walker is coming to speak with you shortly, the nurse replied, glancing nervously at me before departing. My father turned to the family. This is ridiculous. They can't schedule surgery without our consent. Actually, they can, I said quietly. If they determine it's medically necessary and delay would endanger the patient? My father glared at me. Since when are you an expert on hospital protocol? I was saved from answering by the arrival of Dr. Patel, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Mr. and Mrs. Walker, I understand your concerns about meeting the surgeon before proceeding. Unfortunately, Dr. Walker has been called into an emergency surgery that couldn't wait. However, I can assure you, this is unacceptable, my father interrupted. My daughter's life is at stake, and this Dr. Walker can't spare 5 minutes to meet with us. Dr. Patel's eyes flicked to me again, longer this time, recognition dawning. I gave him a slight nod. Sir, he said carefully, Dr. Walker is currently saving another patient's life. As soon as that surgery is complete, you'll have your meeting. In the meantime, we need to continue preparing Emily for her procedure. My mother stood, her composure finally cracking. I want to see my daughter now. Of course, Dr. Patel agreed. She's been moved to pre-op. I can take 2 family members back. My parents immediately moved to follow him, not even considering that I might want to see my sister. I remained in the consultation room with the extended family, listening to their speculations about Emily's condition and complaints about the hospital's handling of the situation. It's appalling. They won't wait for us to meet this surgeon, Aunt Julia declared. Do they know who Thomas Walker is in this community? If they only knew who Annabelle Walker was in this hospital. As the evening progressed, my family's anxiety increased. My father's attempts to arrange a transfer were thwarted by every specialist who reviewed Emily's case. All agreed she needed immediate surgery at Mercy General. The vegetation was too unstable to risk moving her. By 5:30, I knew I couldn't maintain my cover any longer. Emily's condition had deteriorated slightly, her oxygen saturation dropping, indicating the regurgitation was worsening. The surgery couldn't wait, and I couldn't let another surgeon take over simply to protect my secret. I excused myself one final time, went to my office, and changed into my surgical scrubs. I pulled my hair back, donned my surgical cap, and for the first time in years allowed Dr. Annabelle Walker, Chief of Surgery, to walk the same halls as Annabelle Walker, Family Disappointment. It was time for worlds to collide. I instructed Janet to bring my family to the surgical floor conference room. As Chief of Surgery, this would be a normal preoperative consultation. As their daughter, it would be the moment of truth I'd been both dreading and anticipating for years. "Should I come with you?" Janet asked, concern evident in her voice. "No," I said firmly. "This is a conversation I need to have alone." I arrived at the conference room first, deliberately standing at the far end, reviewing Emily's chart when the door opened. My father entered first, followed by my mother and Dr. Patel. They stopped short when they saw me. "What are you doing here?" my father demanded, confusion evident on his face. "And why are you dressed like that?" Before I could respond, the cardiac surgery fellow entered behind them. "Dr. Walker, the patient's latest echo shows the vegetation has increased in mobility. We should proceed as soon as possible." My father turned back to me, his expression changing from confusion to dawning comprehension. My mother's hand went to her throat. "You're Dr. Walker," she whispered. I straightened to my full height, channeling the confidence that had become second nature in my professional life. "Yes, I'm Dr. Annabelle Walker, Chief of Surgery at Mercy General Hospital, and I'll be performing Emily's valve repair this evening." The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face cycled through emotions, disbelief, shock, confusion, and something that might have been pride before settling on anger. "This is some kind of joke," he finally said. "It's not," I replied calmly, gesturing to Dr. Patel. "As my colleague can confirm, I've been at Mercy General for 7 years, became Deputy Chief of Surgery 2 years ago, and was appointed Chief of Surgery last year." My mother sank into a chair, her perfectly composed facade crumbling. "But you dropped out. You failed." "I transferred," I corrected her, "to University of Maryland. I graduated with highest honors, completed my residency here, and developed the valve repair technique that Emily needs right now." My father's expression hardened. "Why the deception? Why let us believe you'd failed?" I could have explained everything, the overheard conversation, the years of undermining the bet he'd placed against my success. Instead, I focused on what mattered now. "We can discuss that later. Right now, Emily needs surgery, and I'm the best person to perform it." "How do we know that?" my father challenged. "How do we know you're not exaggerating your position here, your abilities?" Dr. Patel stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, Dr. Walker is not only our Chief of Surgery, but the pioneer of the valve repair technique your daughter needs. There are only 3 surgeons in the country qualified to perform this specific procedure, and your daughter has the good fortune to have one as her sister." My father looked between us, clearly struggling to reconcile the daughter he'd written off with the accomplished surgeon standing before him. "I want a second opinion," he finally said. "Dad," I said quietly, "Emily doesn't have time for that. The vegetation on her valve is becoming more mobile. If it breaks loose, it could cause a stroke or worse." My mother looked up, tears in her eyes. "You're really a surgeon, all this time?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Now I need your consent to operate on Emily." My father's jaw tightened. "How do we know you're qualified to operate on your own sister? Isn't there some ethical rule against that?" "Normally, yes," I acknowledged. "But in this case, my technique gives Emily the best chance at a full recovery with her native valve. Any other surgeon would likely replace the valve entirely, leading to a lifetime of anticoagulation therapy." My parents exchanged glances, decades of marriage, allowing them to communicate without words. "We need a moment," my father said stiffly. "Of course," I replied, checking my watch. "But only a moment. Emily's surgery can't wait much longer." I stepped outside with Dr. Patel, who immediately turned to me. "You never told me your family didn't know you were a surgeon," he said, disbelief evident in his voice. "It's complicated," I replied. "Clearly." He shook his head. "For what it's worth, I think you're making the right call. Your sister needs your expertise." 5 minutes later, my parents emerged from the conference room. My mother's eyes were red, but her composure had returned. My father looked as though he'd aged a decade in those few minutes. "You'll do the surgery," he said, his tone making it sound more like a command than a concession. "Thank you," I replied professionally. "I'll update you as soon as we're finished." As I turned to leave, my mother caught my arm. "Annabelle," she said softly, "why?" I gently removed her hand. "Not now, Mom. After Emily's safe." The surgical team was ready when I entered the OR. The anesthesiologist had already put Emily under, and the cardiopulmonary bypass machine was prepared. I approached the table and looked down at my sister's unconscious face. In sleep, she looked younger, vulnerability replacing the perfect mask she normally wore. "Let's save her," I said to my team, and we began. The procedure was complex but familiar to my hands. I'd performed it dozens of times, taught it to other surgeons, published papers on it. But never had the stakes felt so personal. Each cut, each suture carried the weight of not just professional responsibility but familial love. The vegetation was even larger than the scans had indicated, nearly 2 centimeters and barely attached. Had we waited even a few more hours, it likely would have embolized with catastrophic consequences. I carefully debrided the infected tissue and reconstructed the valve using my specialized technique that preserved native tissue while ensuring proper function. 4 hours later, we were closing. The repair had been successful, the valve was functioning properly, and Emily's vital signs were stable. The team's relief was palpable. "Excellent work, everyone," I said, as we completed the final sutures. I stayed with Emily as she was transferred to the cardiac ICU, personally checking her post-operative status. Only when I was completely satisfied with her condition did I change out of my surgical garb and prepare to face my family again. They were waiting in the ICU family room, not just my parents, but the entire extended family who had gathered throughout the evening. All conversations stopped when I entered. "Emily came through the surgery very well," I announced. "We successfully repaired her valve, removed the infection, and she's stable in recovery. Barring complications, she should make a full recovery." The relief in the room was immediate and overwhelming. My grandmother began to cry. Uncle Robert slumped in his chair. My father remained standing, his expression unreadable. "When can we see her?" my mother asked. "She'll be unconscious for several more hours," I explained. "One person can sit with her now, and more visitors will be allowed tomorrow once she's stabilized." My parents immediately moved toward the door, their earlier shock about my identity apparently eclipsed by concern for Emily. I stopped them with a raised hand, the gesture of a doctor in command, not a daughter seeking approval. "Before you go in, you need to understand that Emily will be on IV antibiotics for at least 6 weeks. The infection damaged her valve, but we were able to repair it rather than replace it. This means she won't need blood thinners for life, but she will need close monitoring and follow-up care." My father nodded, seemingly incapable of forming words. My mother stepped forward. "Thank you," she said, the words clearly difficult for her. "For saving her." I maintained my professional demeanor. "I'm her doctor. It's my job." "And her sister," my mother added softly. I nodded once, then turned to leave. I had been awake for nearly 24 hours and needed rest before checking on Emily again in the morning. "Annabelle," my father called after me. "We need to talk about all of this." "Tomorrow," I replied without turning around. "After I've checked on my patient." I spent the night in my office too, wired to go home despite my exhaustion. I dozed on the small couch, setting an alarm to check Emily's labs and vitals every 2 hours. By morning, she was showing excellent signs of recovery, her numbers improving steadily. I was reviewing her latest echocardiogram when my phone rang. It was Janet. "Dr. Walker just wanted to let you know your family is assembling in Emily's room. All of them. Hospital policy is 2 visitors at a time, but they're insistent." I sighed. "I'll be right there." When I arrived at Emily's room, the scene was exactly as I'd expected. My parents, grandmother, uncle, aunt, and 2 cousins were crowded around the bed where Emily was beginning to stir from anesthesia. A nurse was attempting to explain visitor limitations without success. "Only 2 visitors are allowed until the patient is fully stable," I said from the doorway, my tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. My father turned, opening his mouth to argue, then closed it again. The family dynamics had shifted overnight, and none of us quite knew the new rules of engagement. "You heard Dr. Walker," my mother said, surprising me. Everyone out except Thomas and me. The extended family filed past me, each giving me looks ranging from confusion to awe. My cousin Sarah paused. "You were in medical school this whole time?" she asked. While we all thought, "Yes," I said simply. She shook her head and continued out the weight of years of condescension, clearly uncomfortable on her shoulders now. I approached Emily's bed, checking her monitors and IV lines before acknowledging my parents. "Her numbers look good," I said. "The antibiotics are working, and the valve repair is holding perfectly." Emily's eyes fluttered open confusion, evident as she tried to process her surroundings. "What happened?" She managed her voice hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. "You had an infection in your heart valve," I explained clinically. "We had to perform surgery to repair it." She focused on me recognition, slowly dawning through the fog of anesthesia and pain medication. "Annabelle, why are you dressed like a doctor?" My father cleared his throat. "Because she is a doctor, Emily. Apparently your sister is the chief of surgery at this hospital." Emily's eyes widened, darting between me and our parents. "What? But I thought—" "We all thought wrong," my mother said quietly. Before the conversation could continue, Emily's nurse entered the room. "Dr. Walker, you're needed in the ER. Trauma coming in, 5 minutes out." I nodded. "I'll be right there." Turning back to my family, I added, "I have to go. Dr. Patel will check on Emily throughout the day. I'll be back when I can." As I turned to leave, the nurse added, "Oh, and pharmacy needs your signature on those medication orders for Mrs. Chen in 412. "I'll stop by on my way down," I assured her. The nurse glanced at my family, then back at me with a slight bow of her head. "Thank you, Chief of Surgery." The title hung in the air between me and my family, the undeniable proof of everything they had refused to believe about me for years. The trauma case kept me occupied for most of the day, a multi-vehicle accident requiring 3 separate surgeries. I was exhausted by the time I finished, having been awake for nearly 36 hours straight. Still, I made a point to check on Emily before allowing myself to rest. When I arrived at her room, I was surprised to find her alone, no sign of our parents or the extended family that had camped out in the waiting room. "They went to get dinner," Emily explained, her voice stronger than it had been that morning. "Dad made everyone leave so I could rest." I checked her latest vitals on the chart, pleased with her progress. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone cracked open my chest," she replied with a weak attempt at humor, which apparently my little sister did. I allowed myself a small smile. Standard procedure for a mitral valve repair. Emily studied me, taking in the white coat with my name embroidered on it, the ID badge identifying me as chief of surgery, the stethoscope around my neck. "How long have you been lying to us?" she asked finally. I pulled a chair beside her bed and sat down, the weight of years of deception suddenly heavy on my shoulders. "I never lied," I clarified. "I just allowed you all to believe what you wanted to believe, which was that you'd failed out of medical school. Which was that I'd transferred to a different program after a personal setback I corrected. The rest was assumption." Emily closed her eyes briefly. "Why, Annabelle? Why let us think you'd given up on your dream? Do you know how many times Mom and Dad used you as a cautionary tale about not overreaching?" The question stung despite my preparation for it. "Actually, I do know. I was there for most of those conversations." "Then why?" I considered my answer carefully. The full truth would hurt her, especially in her current state, but after years of deception, even by omission, I owed her honesty. "Do you remember that Thanksgiving during my 2nd year of med school when I arrived early?" Emily frowned, trying to recall. "Vaguely." "What about it?" "I overheard Dad on the phone with Uncle Robert. He was telling him that he didn't think I would make it through medical school, that I didn't have what it takes. He was essentially betting against me." Emily's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "Dad wouldn't do that." "He did," I said simply. "And it wasn't the first time. Throughout my life, he's expected me to fail while pushing you towards success. When the situation with Jake happened, and I missed those exams, it confirmed what they already believed, that I wasn't strong enough. So you just gave up, let them think they were right." Emily sounded incredulous. "No," I replied, feeling the first stirrings of anger. "I freed myself. For the first time in my life, I could pursue medicine without the weight of their expectations and constant comparisons. I transferred to Maryland, graduated with honors, matched into one of the top surgical residency programs in the country, and became chief of surgery at 33. All without Dad pulling strings or Mom hosting networking parties. All on my own merit." Emily was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "They're devastated," she finally said. "Mom hasn't stopped crying. Dad looks like he's aged 10 years overnight." "I didn't do this to hurt them," I clarified. "I did it to protect myself and my career. By cutting us all out of your life, By establishing boundaries, I corrected. I'm still the same person who showed up at every family event. I just didn't share certain aspects of my life. Certain aspects, Emily repeated incredulously. Annabelle, you're the chief of surgery at a major hospital. That's not a detail, that's your entire life. She was right, of course. The compartmentalization I'd maintained for years looked absurd from the outside. I was going to tell you all eventually, I said, when the time was right. And when would that have been at your retirement party? Despite the tension, I smiled. Probably before then. Emily sighed, then winced as the movement pulled at her surgical incision. You know you're going to have to talk to them, really talk to them right. They're completely shell-shocked. I know, I agreed. And I will once you're stable and I've had some sleep. I've been awake for nearly 2 days straight. Emily's expression softened. You look it. Go rest, Dr. Walker. I'm not going anywhere. The use of my title from my sister's lips felt strange but not unpleasant. For the first time, she was seeing me not as her less successful little sister, but as the accomplished surgeon I had become. I checked her incision one more time, adjusted her IV rate slightly, and prepared to leave. I'll have Dr. Patel check on you tonight. Try to rest. As I reached the door, Emily called after me, Annie. I turned back. Thank you for saving my life. I nodded once and left emotions too complex to untangle in my exhausted state. I slept for 6 hours in my office before being awakened by a call from the cardiac ICU. Emily's fever had spiked, a not uncommon occurrence after this type of surgery, but still concerning. I rushed back to her room, now darkened for the night, and found my parents still there maintaining a vigil by her bed. Her white count is up, I explained after examining her. We'll adjust the antibiotics and monitor her closely. Is this normal? My father asked, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. It's not uncommon, I assured him. The body is responding to both the infection and the surgery. We expected some ups and downs in her recovery. My mother, who had been silent since my arrival, finally spoke. You seem so confident, so knowledgeable. I glanced at her, uncertain how to respond to what appeared to be genuine amazement in her voice. It's my job to be, I said simply. Your job, she repeated softly. Chief of surgery. I nodded, focusing on adjusting Emily's medication rather than engaging with the emotion in her voice. I've ordered a broader spectrum antibiotic, I told them, keeping to safe professional territory. The nurse will administer it shortly. I'll check back in 2 hours to see if her fever's responding. As I turned to leave, my father stood. Annabelle, wait. We need to talk. Not now, Dad. Emily needs my focus as her doctor. Then when he pressed, You've avoided a real conversation for years, apparently. I sighed, too tired for this confrontation. Tomorrow, after morning rounds, we can use the family conference room. He seemed about to argue, but then nodded stiffly. Tomorrow, then. I spent most of the night monitoring Emily's response to the new antibiotics, catching brief naps in my office between checks. By morning, her fever had broken, and her white count was trending downward. Good signs that we were on the right track. After completing my morning rounds and checking on my other patients, I prepared myself for the conversation with my parents. I changed from scrubs into the business attire I kept in my office for meetings, a subtle reminder to myself and to them that this was Dr. Walker speaking, not just their daughter. They were waiting in the conference room when I arrived, both looking as though they'd barely slept. My mother's normally perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, my father's commanding presence diminished by uncertainty. Emily's fever has broken. I began taking control of the conversation immediately. Her latest labs show improvement and will likely move her out of the ICU tomorrow if this trend continues. Thank you, my mother said quietly, for taking such good care of her. I nodded acknowledgement and sat across from them, maintaining professional distance. I understand you have questions. My father leaned forward. Questions, Annabelle, you've been lying to us for years. I never lied, I corrected him. I simply allowed you to believe what you already thought was true, that I wasn't capable of succeeding in medicine. He flinched at the directness of my statement. We never thought you weren't capable. We were concerned about the pressure you were putting on yourself. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because I distinctly remember overhearing you tell Uncle Robert that I wouldn't make it through medical school, that I didn't have what it takes. My father paled. You heard that conversation? Yes. Thanksgiving, second year of med school. I arrived early. My mother looked between us, confused. What conversation? My father had the grace to look ashamed. I may have expressed doubts about Annabelle's ability to handle the stress of medical school. You didn't express doubts, I corrected. You actively bet against me. You were preparing the family narrative for my failure before it even happened. I was being realistic, he defended weakly. No, I said firmly. You were undermining me as you always had, setting me up to fail by expecting failure. The difference is that time I heard you do it. My mother's hand went to her throat. So when you missed those exams. I didn't drop out, I explained. I transferred to University of Maryland School of Medicine. I asked the administration to keep my enrollment private due to personal reasons. I graduated with highest honors, completed my surgical residency at Memorial, and have been on staff here for 7 years. My father shook his head in disbelief. But why the deception? Why let us believe you'd failed when you were succeeding? I met his gaze directly. Because for the first time in my life, I was free from your expectations, from the constant comparison to Emily, from the subtle undermining, from the backhanded compliments. Without the weight of your doubt, I could focus entirely on becoming the surgeon I knew I could be. We were worried about you, my mother protested. All those years thinking you were struggling in those entry-level jobs. Were you worried, I challenged? Or relieved that your narrative about me had been confirmed? Her silence was answer enough. Do you know what it's like? I continued to sit at family dinners and listen to your own parents, use you as a cautionary tale, to hear my own father tell cousins not to end up like Annabelle by aiming too high, to watch my mother shake her head sadly when relatives asked about me. We thought we were protecting you, my father insisted. From what? Success, recognition, achievement? From disappointment, he said quietly. From failure. By ensuring I would fail, I concluded. By never believing I could succeed. The conversation might have continued in this vein had a knock at the door not interrupted us. Janet poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Walker, but Emily's asking for you. Her fever's back and Dr. Patel thought you should take a look. I stood immediately, doctor mode overriding daughter mode. Excuse me, I told my parents. My patient needs me. Emily's condition had indeed worsened. Her fever was higher and her oxygen levels had dropped slightly. I ordered additional tests and discovered a small accumulation of fluid around the heart, a potential complication we needed to address immediately. She needs a pericardial tap, I told Dr. Patel after reviewing the echocardiogram. Prep her now. My parents had followed me to Emily's room and stood watching as the medical team moved with practiced efficiency around their daughter. What's happening? My father demanded. Emily has developed a small effusion fluid around the heart, I explained clinically. We need to drain it to improve her cardiac function. Is it dangerous? My mother asked, her voice trembling. Any procedure carries risks, I acknowledged, but the greater risk would be leaving the fluid there. Who's going to do this procedure? My father asked. I am, I replied, already putting on a sterile gown. The procedure itself was straightforward. I'd performed hundreds of them. With ultrasound guidance, I carefully inserted the needle through Emily's chest wall and into the pericardial space, slowly withdrawing the inflammatory fluid that had accumulated there. Throughout the procedure, I maintained a running commentary, explaining each step to both my team and my parents, who watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. Needle is in position. Beginning aspiration. Fluid is clear, likely reactive rather than infectious. Draining the last of it now. Needle out, applying pressure. Within 20 minutes, it was complete. Emily's oxygen levels immediately improved and her vital signs stabilized. We'll send the fluid for culture, I told Dr. Patel. Increase the diuretics and continue the current antibiotic regimen. I want echo checks every 6 hours to monitor for reaccumulation. He nodded and began implementing the orders as I removed my gown and gloves. My parents stood silently in the corner of the room, watching this display of competence and authority from the daughter they had so thoroughly underestimated. As I finished documenting the procedure in Emily's chart, a nurse entered the room. Seeing me, she approached with a slight bow of her head. Hello, Chief of Surgery. The patient from this morning's transplant is asking for you. His family has some questions about the recovery protocol. Thank you, Jennifer. Tell them I'll be there in 15 minutes. The nurse nodded and left. In the silence that followed, I finally looked up to see my sister's face had dropped in astonishment, and my parents had gone pale. The title, Chief of Surgery, spoken aloud in their presence by someone else, seemed to finally cement the reality they had been struggling to accept. My sister, still groggy from sedation but conscious enough to understand what was happening, whispered, You really are the boss around here, aren't you? For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself a genuine smile. Yes, Emily, I really am. Emily's recovery progressed steadily after the pericardial tap. The fluid didn't return, her fever resolved, and within a week she was ready for discharge with a plan for continued IV antibiotics at home. Throughout her hospitalization, I maintained my dual roles: sister during brief family visits, chief of surgery for the rest of my demanding schedule. My parents remained in a state of stunned adjustment. They watched me lead rounds, consult on complex cases, and direct my medical team with the authority they had never believed I possessed. Occasionally, I would catch my father observing me from a distance, his expression unreadable. My mother alternated between tearful attempts at conversation and long silences heavy with unspoken questions. The day before Emily's discharge, I arranged for my parents to meet me in my office, a space they had never seen, filled with evidence of the life I'd built without them. Medical awards lined one wall, published research papers were framed on another, and my desk held photographs of me with surgical teams and mentors they'd never heard me mention. My mother ran her fingers over a framed certificate, the patent for my valve repair technique. "You invented a surgical procedure?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I replied. 3 years ago. It's now used in 17 countries. My father stood before the wall of awards, reading each plaque silently. Hopkins Medical Society Young Surgeon of the Year, American College of Surgeons Innovation Award. "Why didn't you tell us about any of this, Annabelle?" I sat behind my desk, the position of authority familiar and comforting. "Would you have believed me if I had?" He turned to face me, his expression pained. "Of course we would have." "Really?" I challenged. "After years of telling everyone I'd failed, after using me as your cautionary tale, after dismissing every achievement I'd ever had before." "We were wrong," my mother interjected, her voice breaking. "So terribly wrong about you." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You were." My father sank into a chair opposite my desk, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years. "I don't know how to fix this, Annabelle. I don't know if it can be fixed." His rare admission of uncertainty caught me off guard. Thomas Walker never admitted being wrong, never acknowledged failure. It was the core principle he'd instilled in us from childhood. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," I told him. "I'm asking you to recognize who I actually am, not who you decided I was." "And who are you?" he asked softly. I gestured to the office around us. "This is who I am. Dr. Annabelle Walker, Chief of Surgery, researcher, teacher, surgeon. I built this life while you were telling everyone I couldn't handle medical school." My mother wiped away tears. "We were so focused on protecting you from disappointment that we became the source of it." "Yes," I acknowledged. "You did." "What happens now?" my father asked. "Do we just start over? Pretend the last 7 years didn't happen?" I shook my head. "We can't erase the past, but we can decide what the future looks like. That starts with establishing new boundaries and expectations." "What does that mean?" my mother asked. "It means I won't tolerate being undermined or dismissed ever again," I said firmly. "It means acknowledging that I succeeded not because of your support but despite its absence. It means respecting my achievements and my choices." My father nodded slowly. "And if we can do that, then perhaps we can build a new relationship, one based on who we actually are, not who you wanted me to be." The conversation continued for hours, painful and necessary. They explained their fears that I would be crushed by failure, that I was too sensitive for the brutal world of medicine, that they were trying to guide me toward a path with less resistance. I explained the damage their doubt had caused, the freedom I'd found in their lowered expectations, the strength I'd discovered in myself once I stopped seeking their approval. By the end, nothing was resolved entirely, but a foundation had been laid for whatever might come next. The following day, I signed Emily's discharge papers. As her physician, I reviewed her home care, instructions, medication regimen, and follow-up appointments. As her sister, I promised to visit her at home regularly during her recovery. As my parents prepared to take Emily home, my father hesitated by the hospital room door. "Annabelle," he said formally, "we'd like you to come to dinner next Sunday, if your schedule permits." It was a small gesture, but significant, an acknowledgement of my professional commitments, a respect for my time that had never been present before. "I'll check my calendar," I replied. "I'm on call this weekend, but I should be able to make it." He nodded clearly, unsure how to navigate this new dynamic between us. "Your mother would like to invite some family to properly recognize your achievements." I raised an eyebrow. "You want to show me off now?" He had the grace to look embarrassed. "We want to correct the narrative we created. If you'll allow it." I considered his request. Part of me wanted to refuse to protect the separation I'd maintained for so long. But another part recognized that true freedom came not from hiding my success, but from owning it openly, even in the spaces where I'd been most diminished. I'll be there, I agreed. But no surprises, Dad. This is still new territory for all of us. 2 weeks later, I attended the family dinner. It was awkward at first. Relatives who had patronized me for years now scrambled to acknowledge my position. Cousins who had pitied me now asked medical questions with newfound respect. Aunts and uncles who had whispered about my failure now proudly mentioned their connection to a chief of surgery. Emily, still recovering, but improving daily, watched the proceedings with a mixture of amusement and genuine happiness. During a quiet moment, she found me alone in the kitchen. "They're trying," she observed. "It's clumsy, but they're trying." "Yes," I agreed, watching through the doorway as my father animatedly told Uncle Robert about my patent. "For what it's worth," Emily continued, "I'm sorry I never questioned their version of your life. I should have known better." I smiled at her. "You were raised in the same environment I was, Em. We both played the roles assigned to us." Still, she insisted I was your sister before I was their daughter. I should have seen past the narrative. I squeezed her hand. "We get to write a new story now, both of us." The evening progressed, and eventually my father called for everyone's attention. Standing at the head of the table, glass raised, he looked momentarily uncertain, an expression I had rarely seen on his face. "I want to propose a toast," he began. "To my daughter, Dr. Annabelle Walker." The room quieted, all eyes turning to me. "For many years," he continued, his voice uncharacteristically emotional, "I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought I knew what my daughters were capable of achieving. I was wrong." He paused, collecting himself. "Annabelle taught me that true success isn't measured by following someone else's path or meeting someone else's expectations. It's found in having the courage to pursue your own vision, especially when others doubt you." My mother wiped away tears as he continued. "I failed to see your strength, Annabelle. I failed to recognize your determination. I failed to support your dreams. Yet you succeeded anyway. You became not just a doctor, but a surgeon who saves lives daily. Not just a surgeon, but a leader who guides others. Not just a leader, but an innovator whose work reaches around the world." He raised his glass higher. "I have never been so grateful to be proven wrong." To Dr. Walker, my daughter Emily's sister, and a woman who taught this old man his most important lesson, that sometimes the people we underestimate are exactly the ones who will change the world. The toast was met with enthusiastic agreement from the assembled family, many of whom were seeing me truly for the first time. As glasses were raised and my name was spoken with newfound respect, I felt a complex emotion that wasn't quite forgiveness, wasn't quite vindication, but something new, a kind of peace that came from finally being seen. Later that evening, as guests began to depart, my father found me alone on the back porch. He sat beside me, both of us looking out at the garden rather than at each other. "I've been thinking," he said after a long silence, "about all the young people like you, talented, determined, but without proper support." I glanced at him, curious where this was leading. "The Walker Foundation has considerable resources," he continued. "Resources that could be directed toward scholarships for medical students who might otherwise be overlooked or underestimated." I turned to face him, fully surprised by this unexpected proposal. "I'd like to establish a new program," he said. "The Annabelle Walker Scholarship for Underestimated Students. But I'd need your guidance to structure it properly to identify the right candidates." The gesture was significant, not just the use of my name, but the acknowledgement that I had expertise he did, not that he had something to learn from me. "I'd be honored to help," I replied. He nodded, satisfied, then added, "It won't fix the past, I know that. But perhaps it can create a better future for someone else." "That's all any of us can do," I agreed. 3 months later, I stood at a podium in Memorial Hospital's auditorium, addressing the gathered staff, community members, and press. Behind me sat my family, Emily fully recovered, my parents' attentive extended family members filling an entire row. "Today I'm pleased to announce the establishment of the Walker Foundation Scholarship for Medical Excellence," I began. "This program will provide full funding for 10 medical students annually, with particular focus on candidates who demonstrate exceptional potential despite challenging circumstances or limited support systems." As I outlined the details of the program, I caught my father's eye. He nodded, slightly pride, evident in his expression, not the conditional pride of my childhood that required following his precise path, but a new kind of pride, based on genuine respect for the person I had become. After the announcement, as we gathered for photographs, my mother squeezed my hand. "I still can't believe my little girl is chief of surgery," she whispered. "Believe it," I told her with a smile. "And there's more to come." The scholarship program was just the beginning. Over the following year, I published a memoir about my journey through medicine, focusing on the challenges faced by those who pursue dreams without family support. The book became required reading at several medical schools and opened conversations about the less visible obstacles in medical education. Emily and I developed a closeness we had never experienced before. Free from the comparative framework our parents had created, we discovered a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experiences. She became one of my strongest advocates, speaking alongside me at events about family dynamics and professional support. My parents continued their journey of reconciliation, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes with surprising grace. My father consulted me on medical initiatives for his business. My mother proudly introduced me as my daughter, the surgeon, at her social functions. Small steps, but meaningful ones. At a family gathering celebrating the first anniversary of the scholarship program, Emily proposed a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "To my sister," she said, raising her glass, "who taught us all about quiet strength, who showed us that sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving others wrong, but finding your own path regardless of others' limitations, who saved my life in more ways than one." Later that evening, standing alone in my parents' garden, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The path had been harder than necessary, wounded by the very people who should have supported me most. Yet those wounds had forged a resilience I might not otherwise have developed, a determination that carried me through the most challenging moments of my career. True success, I realized, wasn't measured by titles or achievements, though. Chief of Surgery was certainly a title I had earned. It wasn't measured by others' recognition, though that recognition was finally mine as well. True success was becoming exactly the person I was meant to be, not despite the obstacles, but because of how I had overcome them. The garden door opened behind me, and my father stepped out. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us contemplating the stars above. "I'm proud of you, Annabelle," he said finally. "Not because of your title or your achievements, though they're remarkable. I'm proud of who you are, your compassion, your determination, your integrity. I wish I had seen it sooner." "So do I replied honestly. "But we're here now." He nodded, understanding the boundaries that remained, even as bridges were being built. "Yes," he agreed. "We're here now." And that perhaps was the greatest success of all, the ability to stand in truth, to be fully seen and recognized, to create healing even in relationships that had caused harm. Not a perfect ending, but a hopeful beginning. Have you ever had someone underestimate your potential or doubt your abilities? How did you respond? Did you try to prove them wrong, or did you find your own path to success? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by others' expectations. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most powerful response to doubt is quiet, determined success.